It was a night like any other, or so I thought. The pizzeria's neon sign flickered in the dark, casting a faint red glow across the empty street outside. The scent of mozzarella, oregano, and freshly baked dough lingered in the air. I had taken up this night shift job a week ago to earn some extra cash. It wasn't glamorous, but it paid the bills, and the hours were quiet enough for me to catch up on some podcasts or scroll through my phone in peace. It was close to midnight. The pizzeria was officially open until 1 a.m., but the rush died down after 10. By now, the place was mostly empty except for the occasional late-night customer stumbling in for a slice. I was stationed behind the counter, wiping it down for what felt like the 100th time that night. The rhythmic squeak of the cloth against the surface was oddly soothing, almost hypnotic. The only other person in the building was Mario, the cook, who was in the kitchen prepping dough for the next day's shift. "You're good to leave early if you want," Mario called out. His voice echoed from the back. "Nothing much happens this late." "Nah, I'll stick around," I replied. "The extra hours pay doesn't hurt." Mario shrugged and went back to his work. I leaned against the counter, checking my phone. A true crime podcast was playing in my earbuds, the host's voice narrating a chilling tale of a serial burglar who escalated to murder. It was ironic, I thought, listening to something so dark while surrounded by the comforting hum of kitchen equipment and the warm smell of pizza. The pizzeria was my little bubble of safety in the middle of the city's chaos. Or so I believed. The front door jingled as it opened. I looked up, expecting to see a tired student or a hungry cab driver. Instead, a man in his late 30s stepped in. He was tall and wiry, with unkempt hair peeking out from under a baseball cap. His clothes were plain, a dark hoodie and jeans. But what struck me was the way he moved. Slow, deliberate, like he was trying not to draw attention to himself while doing the exact opposite. "Welcome," I said, slipping out one of my earbuds. "What can I get you?" The man's eyes darted around the room, scanning every corner. He walked up to the counter but didn't respond immediately. His hands were shoved deep into the pockets of his hoodie. "Just a slice," he muttered finally, his voice low and gravelly. "Any particular one?" "Whatever's ready." I grabbed a slice of pepperoni from the warmer, placed it on a paper plate, and slid it across the counter. "That'll be $3. The man pulled out a crumpled bill and some coins, dropping them onto the counter without counting. His gaze never met mine. I felt a prickle of unease but brushed it off. Maybe he was just having a bad night. "Thanks," I said, handing him his change. He didn't respond, just grabbed the plate and shuffled to a corner table. He sat with his back to the wall, facing the door. His eyes kept flicking to the windows, the kitchen door, and me. Something about him felt off. I told myself I was being paranoid, probably influenced by the podcast still playing faintly in my ear. But the feeling wouldn't go away. I decided to keep an eye on him while pretending to busy myself with cleaning. The minutes dragged on. The man barely touched his slice. Instead, he fidgeted with his phone, his leg bouncing nervously under the table. Once, he glanced toward the kitchen door and then back at the front door, as if calculating something. "You need anything else?" I called out, trying to sound casual. He shook his head without looking up. In the kitchen, Mario's voice broke the silence. "Hey, can you grab me the flour from the storage room? I'm running low here." "Sure thing," I replied, hesitating for a moment. The storage room was in the back, down a narrow hallway. It wasn't far, but it meant leaving the front unattended for a minute. I glanced at the man again. He was still in his corner, but his eyes were now on me. The unease in my chest tightened. I grabbed my phone, pausing the podcast, and slid it into my pocket. "Be right back," I said, more for my own reassurance than anything else. The man didn't respond. The hallway leading to the storage room was dimly lit, and the fluorescent bulb overhead flickered slightly. I pushed open the heavy door to the storage room, the smell of flour and cardboard filling my nose. As I searched for the sack Mario needed, I couldn't shake the feeling that I'd made a mistake leaving the front. My pulse quickened. Just as I found the flour, I heard it, a muffled thud. My heart leapt into my throat. I froze, straining to hear more. The sound came again, followed by the faint jingle of the front door's bell. I grabbed the flower and hurried back to the front. The dining area was empty. The man was gone, and so was the slice he'd barely touched. My eyes darted to the register. It was untouched, but something still felt wrong. "Everything okay out there?" Mario's voice startled me. "Yeah," I said, though I wasn't sure. "Just some weird customer." Mario grunted, uninterested. I set the flower on the counter by the kitchen and returned to my spot at the front. I tried to shake off the unease, convincing myself I was overthinking. But deep down, I knew something wasn't right. Half an hour passed. The street outside was silent except for the occasional hum of a passing car. I began to relax, thinking maybe the strange man was just that. Strange. But then I noticed it. The back door to the kitchen was ajar. My blood ran cold. Mario always locked it after bringing in supplies, and I hadn't heard him open it. I walked cautiously toward the door, every instinct screaming at me to turn around. As I reached it, I saw faint scuff marks on the floor, like someone had dragged something heavy through the doorway. "Mario," I called out, my voice trembling. No response. I pushed the door open wider and stepped into the alley behind the pizzeria. The cool night air hit me, carrying with it the faint smell of garbage and grease. The alley was empty, but the scuff marks continued, leading toward the dumpster. "Mario," I called again, louder this time. Still nothing. My phone buzzed in my pocket, making me jump. I pulled it out and saw a text from an unknown number. "Don't call for help." My hands shook as I stared at the screen. The text had to be from the man. He'd been watching me. My eyes darted around the alley, searching for any sign of movement, but there was none. I knew I had to act. I stepped back inside, locking the door behind me. The kitchen was eerily silent. Mario's prep station was abandoned. The dough he'd been working on left half-rolled. I grabbed the largest knife I could find from the rack and moved cautiously toward the dining area. As I entered, I saw him. The man was standing by the counter, his back to me. He had something in his hand, a small black object that looked like a remote. He hadn't noticed me yet. My heart pounded in my ears as I gripped the knife tighter. I knew I had to think fast. "Hey!" I shouted, my voice steadier than I felt. The man spun around, startled. His eyes widened when he saw the knife. For a moment, we just stared at each other, the tension thick enough to cut with a blade. "What are you doing here?" I demanded. He didn't answer. Instead, he took a step toward me. I brandished the knife, keeping it between us. "Stay back." He smirked, his confidence unnerving. "You won't use that," he said, his tone mocking. "Try me." I shot back, though my hands were shaking. In the distance, faint police sirens began to wail, growing louder by the second. The man's smirk faltered, and he glanced toward the door. It was now or never. I lunged forward, not to stab him but to knock the object from his hand. He stumbled back, caught off guard, and the device clattered to the floor. Before he could recover, I kicked it away and shouted, "Help! Police!" at the top of my lungs. The sirens grew deafening, and moments later, red and blue lights flooded the front windows. The man bolted for the back, but the officers were faster. They tackled him to the ground just as he reached the alley. I collapsed against the counter, the adrenaline leaving me shaky and weak. Mario emerged from the storage room, looking disoriented but unharmed. Apparently, the man had locked him inside to keep him out of the way. The police later explained that the culprit was a wanted criminal who had been using small businesses like ours to test out a new type of electronic jammer, likely for future heists. That night changed me. I quit the pizzeria a week later, unable to shake the paranoia. But I also learned something valuable. Sometimes, trusting your instincts can make all the difference. And maybe, just maybe, listening to true crime podcasts wasn't such a bad idea after all. The clock struck midnight as I stepped into the dimly lit pizzeria for my first night shift. The neon sign outside buzzed faintly, casting a warm red glow across the empty street. This wasn't my ideal gig, but money was tight, and the extra cash would go a long way. I'd heard the night shift was uneventful. A few late-night customers, some cleaning duties, and plenty of time to kill scrolling through my phone. "Welcome to the night shift," Mario, the seasoned cook, had said earlier with a chuckle. "It's quiet, but don't let your guard down. You never know what might walk through those doors." I had laughed it off, assuming he was joking. But as I stood behind the counter, the faint hum of the refrigerator and the occasional creak of the building were my only companions. The air smelled of cheese, tomato sauce, and a hint of grease, comforting in its familiarity. Mario was in the back, prepping dough for the next day, leaving me alone in the front to man the counter. The first hour passed uneventfully. I busied myself wiping down the tables, refilling the napkin dispensers, and restocking the soda fridge. The silence was broken only by the occasional car passing outside. I decided to plug in my earbuds and play a true crime podcast to keep myself entertained. The host's voice narrated chilling tales of unsolved mysteries and cold cases, making the quiet pizzeria feel a little less lonely. It was nearing 1 a.m. when the bell above the door jingled, snapping me out of my trance. I looked up to see a man entering. He was tall and lean, with a scruffy beard and a baseball cap pulled low over his face. His clothes, a dark hoodie and worn jeans, seemed ordinary enough, but there was something about his demeanor that put me on edge. He moved slowly, deliberately, as if calculating every step. "Evening," I said, forcing a smile. "What can I get for you?" The man didn't respond immediately. His eyes darted around the room, taking in every detail. Finally, he muttered, "Just a slice. Any particular kind?" "Whatever's ready." I grabbed a slice of pepperoni from the warmer and slid it onto a paper plate. "That'll be $3. He pulled out a crumpled bill and some coins, dropping them onto the counter without a word. As I handed him his change, I couldn't help but notice his hands, scarred knuckles and dirt under his nails. He took the plate and sat at a corner table, his back to the wall, eyes fixed on the door. Something about him felt off. He barely touched his slice, instead fidgeting with his phone and glancing at the windows and the kitchen door. I told myself I was overthinking it. Maybe he was just tired or having a rough night. Still, I couldn't shake the unease creeping up my spine. "Hey, can you grab me the flour from the storage room?" Mario called from the kitchen. His voice startled me, and I realized I'd been staring at the man longer than I intended. "Sure," I replied, reluctant to leave the front unattended but not wanting to seem paranoid. I slipped my phone into my pocket and headed toward the storage room at the back of the building. The hallway was narrow and dimly lit, the fluorescent light flickering ominously. I pushed open the heavy door, the smell of flour and cardboard filling my nose as I searched for the sack Mario needed. That's when I heard it. A muffled thud, followed by the faint jingle of the front door bell. My heart skipped a beat. I grabbed the sack of flour and hurried back to the front, my pulse quickening. The dining area was empty. The man was gone, his half-eaten slice abandoned on the table. My eyes darted to the cash register, but it was untouched. Still, the unsettling feeling in my chest tightened. "Mario," I called out, my voice trembling slightly. "Yeah," he answered from the kitchen. Relief washed over me, but it was short-lived. As I moved to lock the front door, I noticed something out of place. The back door to the kitchen was ajar. Mario always kept it locked unless he was bringing in supplies. I stepped cautiously toward it, every instinct screaming at me to turn back. The cool night air drifted in, carrying with it the faint smell of garbage and grease. Outside, the alley was empty, but faint scuff marks on the ground suggested someone had been there recently. "Mario," I said louder this time, "did you open the back door?" "No." "Why?" I didn't answer. My phone buzzed in my pocket, making me jump. I pulled it out and saw a text from an unknown number. "Don't call the cops." My blood ran cold. The message had to be from the man. He'd been watching me. My eyes darted around the empty pizzeria, every shadow suddenly feeling alive. I locked the back door and grabbed the largest knife I could find from the kitchen, my hands trembling as I clutched it tightly. The silence was deafening. I moved back toward the counter, my ears straining for any sound. That's when I saw him. The man was back, standing by the counter with something in his hand. It looked like a small, black device, a remote or a detonator. His back was to me, and he hadn't noticed my presence. "Hey!" I shouted, my voice breaking the tension like a gunshot. He spun around, his eyes widening when he saw the knife in my hand. For a moment, neither of us moved. Then he smirked, his confidence unnerving. "You don't want to do this," he said, his tone calm but threatening. "Put the knife down." "Why are you here?" I demanded, ignoring his command. He took a step closer and I raised the knife higher. "Stay back." Before he could respond, the distant wail of police sirens pierced the night. His smirk faltered, and his eyes darted toward the door. I realized then that he hadn't expected me to call for help, or maybe he thought I hadn't had the chance. In a split second, I made my move. I lunged forward, not to stab him, but to knock the device from his hand. He stumbled back, caught off guard, and the device clattered to the floor. Before he could recover, I kicked it away and screamed, "Help! Police!" The sirens grew louder, and moments later, red and blue lights flooded the windows. The man bolted for the back door, but the officers were faster. They tackled him in the alley, pinning him to the ground as he shouted obscenities. Mario emerged from the kitchen, looking bewildered. The police explained that the man was a wanted criminal, known for breaking into small businesses to test out electronic jammers for future heists. He targeted the pizzeria, thinking it was an easy mark. That night stayed with me long after it ended. I quit the job a week later, unable to shake the paranoia. But I also learned something important. Sometimes, trusting your instincts can make all the difference. And maybe, just maybe, Mario's warning on my first day wasn't a joke after all. It was supposed to be a quiet night, just me and the sound of the pizza ovens humming in the background. I'd taken the night shift at Luigi's Pizzeria out of sheer desperation. College loans don't pay themselves, and working odd hours meant fewer interruptions from customers, or so I thought. Luigi's wasn't the most popular joint in town. By day, it served as a family-friendly eatery with checkered tablecloths and kids running around. By night, it was a haven for delivery drivers and the occasional insomniac looking for greasy comfort food. I figured it'd be an easy gig. Man the counter, clean up after the few late-night stragglers, and maybe sneak in some studying. When I clocked in that evening, Luigi himself handed me the keys with a grin. "Easy night, kid. Just keep the place clean and don't fall asleep. Lock up when you're done." He slapped me on the back and left, leaving me alone in the dimly lit restaurant. The first couple of hours were uneventful. I wiped down tables, restocked the soda fridge, and checked the delivery orders that came in sporadically. The place was eerily quiet except for the low buzz of the overhead lights and the occasional hum of the refrigerator. It was almost too quiet, but I told myself it was just my nerves. Around midnight, the bell above the door jingled. A man walked in, and immediately, I felt a shift in the atmosphere. He was tall, with a wiry build, a scruffy beard, and a baseball cap pulled low over his face. His hoodie looked a size too big, and his jeans were frayed at the edges. There was nothing overtly threatening about him, but something in the way he moved, slow and deliberate, set me on edge. "Hey!" I greeted him, trying to sound casual. "What can I get for you?" He didn't answer right away. His eyes scanned the room like he was sizing it up. Finally, he said, "A slice of whatever's hot." I grabbed a pepperoni slice from the warmer, slid it onto a paper plate, and placed it on the counter. $3. He handed me a crumpled bill and some coins without meeting my eyes. I gave him his change and watched as he took his slice to a corner table, sitting with his back to the wall. He barely touched the pizza, instead fidgeting with his phone and glancing toward the door and windows every few seconds. I tried to brush it off, Maybe he was just nervous or having a bad day. Still, I couldn't shake the uneasy feeling gnawing at me. I busied myself with small tasks, keeping one eye on the man. The minutes dragged on, and the tension in the air seemed to grow thicker. "Hey, can you grab me a fresh box of napkins from the back?" Mario, the cook, called out from the kitchen. He'd come in earlier to prep for the next day and had been quietly working in the background. "Sure," I replied, hesitant to leave the dining area but not wanting to make a big deal out of nothing. I headed to the storage room at the back of the building. The hallway was dimly lit, and the fluorescent light flickered ominously. As I rummaged through the shelves, I heard the faint jingle of the front door bell. When I returned to the dining area, the man was gone. His slice was still on the table, half-eaten, and the door was slightly ajar. I glanced around nervously, but there was no sign of him. My phone buzzed in my pocket, and when I pulled it out, my stomach dropped. The screen displayed a text from an unknown number. "Don't call the cops." I froze, my mind racing. How did he get my number? Had he been watching me this whole time? My hands trembled as I locked the front door and double-checked the windows. I ran to the kitchen where Mario was kneading dough. "Did you see that guy leave?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. Mario shook his head. "No." "Why?" I didn't answer. Instead, I walked toward the back door, which was slightly ajar. My heart pounded as I peered outside. The alley was empty, but the faint sound of footsteps echoed in the distance. I shut the door and locked it, my palms sweaty as I gripped the handle. Just as I turned around, I heard a noise from the dining area. A soft, almost imperceptible shuffle. I crept back, my pulse racing, and saw him. The man was standing by the counter, his back to me, fiddling with something in his hands. It looked like a small black device, maybe a phone or a remote. "Hey!" I shouted, my voice cracking slightly. He spun around, his eyes narrowing as he saw me. "You shouldn't have done that," he said, his tone calm but menacing. "Done what?" I asked, stalling for time. My eyes darted toward the knife rack behind the counter. If he made a move, I needed to be ready. "You locked the doors," he said, stepping closer. "Now it's just you and me." My heart felt like it was about to burst out of my chest. "What do you want?" I demanded, my voice trembling. He didn't answer. Instead, he raised the device in his hand and pressed a button. Nothing happened, but his smirk sent chills down my spine. Suddenly, I heard a loud crash from the kitchen. Mario shouted, and I bolted toward the sound. The back door was wide open, and Mario was standing there, holding a rolling pin like a weapon. "He's not alone," Mario said, his voice shaking. "Someone else is out there." Panic set in. I grabbed the largest knife from the kitchen and positioned myself near the door. The man from the dining area appeared in the doorway, his smirk replaced by a cold, calculating expression. "Put the knife down," he said, his voice low. "You don't want to get hurt." Before I could respond, the sound of approaching sirens filled the air. His eyes widened, and he turned to run, but Mario and I blocked his path. Moments later, red and blue lights flooded the pizzeria, and police officers stormed in. The man and his accomplice were arrested on the spot. The officers explained that they were part of a group targeting small businesses, testing devices that could disable security systems. We'd been lucky. Their plan hadn't gone as smoothly as they'd hoped. That night changed everything for me. I quit the job the next day, unable to shake the fear that something worse could have happened. But I also learned to trust my instincts. Sometimes the quietest nights hide the darkest dangers.
Hey everyone, thank you so much for supporting this channel. It truly means a lot. As a broke college student editing all my videos on an Android phone, it takes a lot of effort to bring these stories to life. A laptop would help me create better content faster, so if you enjoy my work, please subscribe and share. Your support makes all the difference. Thank you so much.